What's up, investors? It's the Russian dude. There are few alliances in modern Russia that shape the entire political landscape more than this bizarre, uncomfortable, and brutally pragmatic relationship between Vladimir Putin and Ramzan Kadyrov. For 2 decades, these two men pretended to be inseparable. Putin gave Kadyrov money, weapons, autonomy, and a blank check to just literally rule Chechnya however he wanted. And in return, Kadyrov delivered what the Kremlin valued about everything else: silence and loyalty. After 2 devastating wars, bombings, insurgencies, and chaos, Putin just needed the North Caucasus to become quiet. Kadyrov made it that way. Through fear, through executions, through loyalty built on ideology. Not on ideology, I mean, but on personal depth and absolute submission. And yet today that pact is falling apart. Not loudly, not publicly, not with speeches or declarations, but quietly. Like a house that begins to crack long before anyone notices that the walls are already shifting. Because the war in Ukraine did not just break the Russian economy or the Russian military, it broke the arrangement between Putin and Kadyrov. It exposed what happens when a dictator who thinks he can control everything suddenly realizes that he cannot control the just one single man that he empowered the most. The man who also built a state within a state, the man who commands tens of thousands of fighters loyal not to Russia, not the constitution, not to the Ministry of Defense, but to him personally. The Kadyrovtsy, the private army, the force Putin allowed, encouraged, funded and armed, and he now fears. So today, let's walk straight into the heart of this uncomfortable truth. Why did Putin allow a warlord to build a private army in the first place? Why did Kadyrov step back from fighting in Ukraine while still collecting billions from Moscow? And most importantly, what is Kadyrov really building in Chechnya as his health declines and his ambitions grow darker? Because something is definitely brewing in the Caucasus, and the Kremlin can feel the heat rising. To understand why the Kadyrovtsy war even allowed to exist in the first place, you have to go back to the early 2000s. After the Second Chechen War, Putin was desperate for a solution that did not involve endless military operations. Russia was already too exhausted, the army was humiliated, and Chechnya was in ruins both physically and politically. The Kremlin just needed someone ruthless enough to crush any potential rebellion, loyal enough to obey Moscow's orders, and ambitious enough to see collaboration as a path to personal power. So, well, that's where we enter Ahmad Kadyrov first of all, and after his conveniently timed elimination, then world-famous Ramzan Kadyrov. Putin saw Ramzan as the perfect tool candidate, young, violent, fiercely loyal, hungry for influence, and Ramzan saw Putin as the perfect sponsor, a leader who would hand him money, weapons, and authority in exchange for suppressing insurgency. From this twisted partnership came the Kadyrovtsy, units that were formally integrated into Russia's National Guard, but operated effectively as a private army loyal exclusively to the Kadyrov family. For years this arrangement worked. Chechnya remained quiet, and in exchange Moscow's money kept flowing. Billions of rubles every single year, officially for reconstruction, for regional development, but in reality for something far simpler. Just buying loyalty, simple as that. Buying peace, buying Ramzan's obedience. And for a while, Putin believed he had mastered this dangerous game. He believed he had tamed the Caucasus by turning a warlord into a governor. But as always happens with warlords, the moment they gain too much power and they feel too confident, the balance shifts. By the time the war in Ukraine began, Kadyrov was no longer just a regional leader. He was a king with his own private military. A king who understood that Putin needed him far more than he needed Putin. And that is where the real danger began. Let's talk about it in our next chapter. When Russia launched the invasion of Ukraine, Kadyrov instantly saw an opportunity. He sent flashy units, filmed propaganda videos on TikTok, TikTok battalion, I guess, posted dramatic speeches online and positioned himself as the loudest supporters of the war. He wanted glory, visibility, influence. He wanted to show Putin that Chechnya was not just loyal, it was indispensable. But then something changed. Within the first year alone of the war, Kadyrov publicly announced that that's it, Chechnya had sacrificed too many men already, and that moving forward their involvement would be reduced significantly. Think about the audacity of that statement. A Russian regional leader telling the Kremlin that he will not be sending more fighters. This was not a suggestion, this was a declaration. In any normal authoritarian system, this would have been seen as an act of defiance, a literal treason. But what did Putin do? Nothing. Not because he didn't hear it. I mean, of course he did. Not because he didn't care, but because he could not afford to push back. The truth is simple. By this stage of the war, Putin needed Chechnya stability more than he needed Chechen fighters. And Kadyrov knew it. The moment he stopped sending large numbers of troops, the Kremlin did not punish him. Instead, and I mean, here's where the true insanity begins. They kept paying him. One guy's doing a treachery and they just keep paying. They just keep sending billions. They keep funding Kadyrovtsy as if Chechnya were still heavily involved in Ukraine. And these payments, they were not wages. They're not defense budgets. They're bribes, literally, dressed as subsidies. Money transferred just to ensure that Chechnya stays quiet, stays loyal, stays obedient. Except Chechnya is not participating anymore, and, well, the money still keeps flowing. And Ramzan, now facing severe health problems and speculated to be nearing the end of his political and literal lifespan, well, he no longer cares about the money for the sake of the wealth. Once a man sees death approaching, his priorities shift significantly. He stops thinking about luxuries, he starts thinking about legacy. And that is exactly when Kadyrov changed the game. Let's talk about it in more details in our next chapter. With Russian money still flowing into Grozny while Chechen fighters stepped back from Ukraine, a new pattern emerged. Kadyrov began investigating those funds not to reconstruction, not into infrastructure, not into social programs, not even into his own collection of luxury cars and houses in Dubai. He started investing them into expanding and upgrading his private army. The Kadyrovtsy grew larger, more loyal, more isolated, from Russian command structures isolated, and significantly better equipped. Modern armored vehicles, upgraded weapons, specialized units, elite training facilities, all paid for Moscow. By Moscow, I mean. But the question hangs in there still, for what? Kadyrov's forces are not structured to serve the Ministry of Defense of Russia. They do not operate under federal command. Their chain of command ends with one single man. You guessed who? Everything from the smallest training exercise to the largest deployment is controlled by the Kadyrov family. More importantly, just Ramzan himself. This is not a regional security unit, this is literally a parallel military. Many analysts have tried guessing Kadyrov's intentions. Some believe he wants to secure the region after his death, preventing clans from fighting for power. Others argue he is building the army for his son Adam, grooming him to inherit not just political office but military authority. And then there is the most uncomfortable for the Kremlin theory, that Kadyrov is just preparing for some degree of separation, autonomy, or even rebellion in the future. Not tomorrow, most likely, not next month, not next year maybe, but eventually at some point. Because think about it. What else would justify building a force so large, so loyal, so independent, and so well funded at a time when Russia itself is struggling with manpower shortages, equipment shortages, and budget deficits? This is not a militia, this is an actual army. An army inside an army, within an army within a federation that is barely holding itself together. And, well, once again, Putin definitely noticed it, but he just simply cannot do anything about it. Because the moment he tries cutting funds, stops sending money to Kadyrov, well, the silence in the Caucasus disappears. The moment he tries challenging Kadyrov, the entire region erupts. Putin created this monster, and now the monster is too large to fight without risking another Chechen war. At the same time with Ukrainian war, it's simply impossible for the Kremlin. And the last thing the Kremlin wants at a time when they cannot even replenish their own ranks in Ukraine is to open another, once again, front inside Russia itself. Which leads us now to the final chapter. The worst part about this entire situation is that Putin knows exactly what is coming. Kadyrov is sick, visibly aging, and rumored to be facing serious health problems. And sick men, especially those who rule through fear and violence, are no longer think about money or comfort. They think about legacy, about succession, about protecting their family, about building something that survives them. And Kadyrov's private army is not just a military force, it is his legacy project. Putin fears this for several reasons. First, the army is loyal to Kadyrov personally, not to Moscow. The moment Kadyrov dies or steps down, there is no guarantee they will obey the Kremlin's orders. Second, the potential for a power struggle inside Chechnya is enormous. Various, multiple, hundreds of different clans, rivals, and factions may fight for control, and the Kadyrovtsy could act independently or even worse against Moscow itself. Third reason, the presence of such a force encourages separatist aspirations, or at the very least autonomy far beyond what Putin ever intended. But the final reason, Putin fears that this situation is the most humiliating one. This reason is just that he is the one financing it all. The billions of rubles intended to keep Chechnya loyal might instead be funding a future rebellion. Putin is essentially sponsoring an army that may one day turn its guns on its own system. And here's the real irony. Putin allowed this to happen because he was convinced he could control everything and everyone. He believed loyalty could be bought forever. I'm a person who doesn't even care about loyalty, come on. He thought fear would always work, but now, as his own war weakens the country, and as Kadyrov prepares for the final chapter of his life, the balance of power is shifting, quietly, dangerously, and very irreversibly. The Kremlin, though, will never admit it publicly, of course. They will insist everything is under control as always. They will smile, shake hands, and repeat the same empty phrases about unity and loyalty. But behind the scenes, Putin knows that he is running out of time, because he may have already funded the very uprising he fears the most. Chechnya is no longer just a simple region. It's a loaded gun pointing towards Kremlin. And Putin is the one who helped build it and is now holding his finger on the trigger. Come on, Vladimir Vladimirovich, just press it already. Well, there you have it, guys. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to my channel for more videos like this. If you wish to join our private Telegram group where you can ask me direct questions, you can do it by becoming our Patreon or YouTube channel member. The links are down below. You will receive an invitation link immediately. Thanks much for watching. Have a good weekend. See you on Tuesday.
We won't succumb to their tricks, the facade they try to sell. Their twisted words and feeble claims are resolve they cannot quell. We see through their lies, their feeble attempts to sway. We do not believe